When we started, the fact that a coffee bar existed somewhere was a reason to write about it. And in 2009, 2010, there might be one really good coffee bar in East LA. Where now, all these kinds of areas have 5 coffee bars, 10 coffee bars, 20 coffee bars.
You're listening to the Taste Podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Matt Rodbard, here with Senior Editor Anna Hezel.
Today on the show, Matt is talking to Jordan Michelman, one of the founding editors of Sprudge and a co-author of The New Rules of Coffee. Also, one of our favorite contributors here at Taste.
Yeah, it was great to catch up with Jordan. He is a Taste contributor and one of my favorite writers, and we talk about some of his work on Taste, including a great story about vegan ice cream and a story he's working on about Russian grocery stores and some of his favorite products there. But we also have to talk about coffee. He's the editor-in-chief of Sprudge, and it's one of the most influential coffee websites and brands in the world. And we talked a lot about how coffee is changing and really the excitement that surrounds coffee right this day.
Here's Matt talking to Jordan.
Jordan Michelman, welcome to the Taste Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be back, and I'm glad that the podcast is back. I'm like such a fan, and I'm really glad that it's happening again, and I'm thrilled that you're going to let me talk to you about it.
Absolutely. We did the podcast with your partner when we were promoting The New Rules of Coffee, which you did with 10 Speed, which I love that book.
Yeah, and that was like a big party, right? We were at a big coffee party downtown, and then now here we are up in the Penguin Ramdam House, high rise in Hell's Kitchen, Midtown.
Up in the lab. I want to ask you first, like you come to New York, you're based in Portland, Oregon.
Correct.
Come to New York a few times a year, and I wanted to get, where have you been? You have great sense of where you want to go. You always have great lists. Where have you been in this trip?
This is my first time here in 2 years, since before the pandemic. The last time that I was here was in January of 2020, right before things got, fully weird. And so I really love this city. My mom and dad are both New Yorkers. I grew up in a very sort of New York expat family out in the Pacific Northwest. The joke was that our house growing up was the last stop on the L train, just like 3,000 miles west. Yeah, so when I come out here, there's just it gives me a lot of feelings, and it's got a little bit of like a salmon returning to the spawning grounds thing or whatever. It's just like where I'm from.
You're also having salmon. You're actually consuming salmon.
That's right. I got some belly locks in my bag. I went to Zabar's too.
Nice.
So, this time here, have been running around and doing some work stuff and some kind of meeting stuff, which is great. And obviously there's a lot of kind of media world that happens out here. And so when I get time here, it's important to like spend time with people and go and do all that stuff, which is great and always fun. And then I've had a chance to go to some fun kind of like mostly classic stuff this time. My business partner and I have been going every night to Julius, the like incredible gay bar on
West Village.
In the West Village.
You always, I feel, go there because you have a connection with Julius, right?
Yeah, my business partner is sort of a archivist and collector of like 20th century LGBTQ history and books and small print and stuff. And so over the years when he and I have done all the traveling we've done all over the world, we're sort of inevitably going to places that like are in that line of interest in his world. And I'm always happy to get dragged along because a lot of times you get to go to these like amazing rooms and be in these incredible bars and stuff. And so I got to kind of do, I guess, like my version of that today, which is like I went and had sturgeon scrambled eggs at in a bialy at Barney Greengrass earlier today, and I like walked around Central Park, which was really dreamy, and went to Zabar's, which is amazing. And some of the other kinds of stuff that we're trying to kind of do is like see coffee, of course, because that's my day job is writing about coffee and publishing a coffee website. And in particular, trying to see some classic coffee stuff. So like I went, speaking of like the West Village, I went and got into Puerto Rico.
Oh, of course. You went there.
Yeah. It was the first time. I've been before a couple of times,
Sweet.
But I'd been maybe a few trips since I'd gone.
Okay.
And that was really interesting. And then also, I guess, sort of more recent history or 21st century coffee history, but like going to Abrazo, going to like the original Ninth Street Espresso Espresso, which my business partner used to work at.
Oh, he did? He worked there?
Yeah. That's
no
right.
way. What year?
Yeah, from 2005 to 2008.
Oh, nice. The original.
Yeah, the original one. And he helped open some of the other ones. I think the 10th Street one opened when he was there, and Chelsea Market. So spending some time in some kinds of stuff like that for a bigger project that we've been working on in stops and starts for Sprudge for a few years, and is finally feeling like is back to being something that we can properly wrap our arms around now. Knock on wood. I won't actually knock on the table because I don't want to.
Yeah, we don't want to get the microphone. But let's talk about Sprudge because I want to contextualize it a bit. Sprudge is a website. It is a publication that has written books. You've got written one and you're working on one. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But really, for me, it's a real authority in the coffee world, but with a real sense of style and voice. There are other authorities. Barista Magazine is one. But I think what Sprudge has done is created an online community for coffee professionals and fans of coffee. So that's the kind of backstory. But what is your mission with Sprudge right now?
Well, as the project has gone on and continued to grow, today Sprudge is the most popular coffee publication in the world by readership. And for us, there's a real line that gets walked in that of how you serve as many people as possible truthfully and faithfully and in the kind of reading public's best interest. And so there's lots of different things for how we sort of approach that, and making things that are interesting to people who care a lot about coffee, but accessible to people who maybe just found us on Google or had a friend share a guide that we wrote while they were traveling or things like that. People find our stuff through lots of different ways, and growing the big tent approach to it, making a publication that day over day feels accessible and inclusive so that we can do right by all of the different kinds of touch points and exposure to coffee that we know are coming through the digital door of the website every day.
What's exciting you in the world of coffee right now? I feel like coffee, we did a coffee shoot together. You were a co-editor on that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we'll link to that in the show notes, but I feel 2 years is like 25 years in real time. So I feel like what right now is most exciting you?
When we started, the fact that a coffee bar existed somewhere was a reason to write about it. And in 2009, 2010, there might be one really good coffee bar in East LA. There might be one really good coffee bar in, the chunk of Brooklyn that you're talking about or whatever. Now, all these kinds of areas have 5 coffee bars, 10 coffee bars, 20 coffee bars, and there's a lot of looks like a duck, talks like a duck, but brother, it ain't a duck, like in terms of places being very kind of quality focused and quote unquote specialty or third wave or notable or extraordinary. And that is in some ways kind of a gut check for us because it means thinking through more critically about, well, if the existence of a place is no longer a reason for it to be a story, what is? And when you follow that pathway, inevitably what you get to is this idea of saying, well, maybe it's mature enough that it's reached a point where you can think about it in terms of criticism and curation. And it's something that we've shied away from historically. We've never done hot map, heat list, top 10 stuff with coffee. But I think that we're getting close to it being time for that sort of a thing to feel okay.
Would you do full coffee reviews in a style of the New York Times restaurant review with stars? And would you actually go multiple times, have multiple people visit the way that the Times does it? I feel like that might be what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think that's a really fun, long-term thing for how it would look. I think in the shorter term, we've been working really sort of conceptually for several years and then now actually into the work of it, of building out. That's something we've been calling, and it may change before it actually comes out, but this idea of like the 22 cafes shaping America in 2022. And then the idea of there also being kind of a yearly recurring thing where we're doing like what the Beard Foundation does with American classic restaurants, where we're doing that with American classic coffee companies, coffee shops, coffee bars, places that have become part of the wider, intangible cultural fabric of enjoying coffee as a delicacy.
What's a
in
brand
America.
that comes to mind right away when you're thinking about the heritage brands?
Well, I mentioned going to Puerto Rico earlier, and we sort of talked about that because my business partner remembers when he was working in coffee, early kind of embryonic third wave coffee in New York, 2005, 2006. Places like that were almost like the enemy in a way, or it was very first wave, second wave. It was like the old style or whatever. But now you have this place that's been extolling the virtues of coffee as a delicacy for like 100 years, right? And has this sort of intangible cultural coffee heritage in this very important historic neighborhood. And that to me, I actually think it is sort of interesting to think about writing an essay about why that would be, part of this canon of like a classic American coffee establishment. One of the other places we've talked about a lot is like the intelligentsia on Silver Lake in Los Angeles as being this like incredibly important cultural hub through which this wider boom, as you well know, ongoing boom of Los Angeles being probably the best coffee city in the world, or in the top 5 of coffee cities in the world for sure. And you can kind of flight map that back to this moment at this one place. And so getting to think about that in the context of saying like, this is a culturally, historically significant coffee bar.
I love that you bring that location up. We had an event out in LA and we had Jeff Watts from Intelligentsia and a bunch of other folks on that panel. We had a panel conversation talking about the importance of Los Angeles and particularly the Intelligentsia at Sunset Junction, in terms of kind of inspiring the LA coffee scene. So I'll link to that. I have one more coffee question, and I think it's important for our listeners to realize we're coming from a point of view that coffee to us is undervalued, and that we really feel strongly, or I feel strongly, you can correct me, but I believe you do too, is that we should be paying more for coffee, put in our bodies multiple times a day, and we sometimes quibble at like a $3 cup of coffee when in fact we should be paying double that, and giving money back to the farmers, et cetera, et cetera. I have a lot to say about that. That's one myth or idea that I want to present. What is another myth about coffee that you think our wide listenership for the Taste Podcast should know?
Well, it's interesting. I think that there's probably some stuff that we talked about in the first book that when we're going to have a crack at writing another book, we're going to think about a little differently. And one of the things we talk about in the first book is like, there's basically a chapter where we say, don't make espresso at home. And like, I have had very earnest conversations with people at all different touch points in my life about like, just go to the coffee bar. They're going to have better gear. Espresso is a volume business. It always tastes better. All of the variables will be better dialed in at the espresso bar. Just go to the espresso bar, save your money. Well, maybe some of the tech and the interest in the home thing is caught up to the wider impulse to want to do these kinds of things at home. And it's something that I think that there's been some new products and innovation that have come onto the market since our first book came out. And I don't think that is going to be the path that we take with the second book we do. I actually think that you're going to see us really engage and embrace with it's sort of, so you've decided to make espresso at home.
Cool. I like that.
We'll hold hands together and we'll take like a clear-eyed view of how this can be done if you so choose.
I like that you coming together with a mutual understanding with your reader for the second book, as opposed to saying like these are all the things you need to know about coffee. Yeah, here they are. Let's talk a little bit more about your second book, because when's it going to be out and what are the details?
Great. So we're doing it with Union Square, which is the new reformatted of it's Sterling, right, is what the company used to be called, and it's through the wider group that's Barnes & Noble, and so there is this connectivity to Barnes & Noble with it, which we're actually really excited about. I mean, we both remember getting dropped off at the Barnes & Noble at the Tacoma Mall when we were teenagers and like going and killing hours there, So it's a very, I don't mean it ironically, like we really do. We love that stuff. And so that connectivity to it, we're really excited about. But it will also be available in all different kinds of places, and indie cookbook stores, and Amazon and all the rest of it. The first book that we did with 10 Speed Press, we loved everything about the process of it. And it was done as part of a series, this New Rules series. There's a New Rules of Wine, which John Bonet wrote. There's a New Rules of Cheese, which Anne Saxelby wrote.
Rest in peace.
I know, rest in peace, poorly, of blessed memory, Anne Saxelby. I think there's one other one that they did, right? And there's another New Rules. There's anyways. So it was part of this series, and that gave us a template to work from, which for a first book was really great. And we ended up writing a book that had a lot of kinds of feelings about coffee history and expressions of coffee culture, where it came from, where it might go, and all these kinds of things. But we never really told you how to make coffee in it. Like, we never really were like, this is what you do. Or
That's
like this,
right.
Or like, this is what you could do if you'd like. So it's really sort of more theoretical. And this second book is going to be more like practice.
Like a cookbook,
it's, like
really.
It's theory into practice, yeah. And so it's structured like a cookbook. It's like a coffee cookbook. The idea is that if you have been given a bag of nice coffee or purchased one from your grocery store or coffee bar, here's all the things you can do with it. And it turns out all the things you can do with it is, a lot of things. Yeah. And that includes brewing coffee with it, which we're going to go into all different kinds of methods in detail and talk to some experts and get some different voices and perspectives and recipes and stuff. There's also all these things that you can do with it, in the fridge for making cold brew and making shrubs and syrups and sort of stocking your bar, making spice rubs and even some baked goods.
Coffee as an ingredient is actually a pantry item. I love that.
That's exactly right.
And I feel the coffee flavor profile, sometimes you assume it's one thing and that it's like coffee ice cream is what you think about. But clearly coffee is used in like red eye mayo, for example. Like David Chang, great recipe from his book.
Yeah. And we're gonna show you like an awesome espresso brownies.
Yeah.
And like kind of tell a little bit of pocket history like of the coffee cake, like as a cultural thing, the coffee cake, where the coffee cake comes from, and sort of its place in American diner pantheon alongside a cup of coffee.
Are coffee cakes, is that a Jewish thing? Because I feel like my Jewish grandmother in Skokie, Illinois, always had it around. But that could be just my blind spot. Is it a wider thing?
My understanding at this point, and we're not into the research part on it yet, is that it is more like a pan-Central European thing.
Okay.
And that the coffee cake as we know it in America has its roots in a German baking tradition. That has some attachment to different like German cakes and strudels and things like that.
Hey, my grandmother was born in Munich, Germany.
Yes.
There you go. Maybe
so
that's
there's
it.
some attachment there, but it's certainly something that's become, adapted and accepted as this like diner culture thing. Yeah. And that has a lot of overlap with American Jewish culture. And getting to explore some of that kind of stuff, for like a page or like 2 pages.
Yeah.
It's going to be really, really fun. And then the last section of it is coffee at the home bar. And that's going to be, some interrogating, like, if you would like to make a really great espresso martini at home, we're going to teach you how to do it. But also things like kind of arguing for coffee as an interesting thing to do with like flavored spirits and how to make your own coffee vodka and some stuff like that.
Really exciting book. I can't wait to read it. It's going to be out in a couple of years, I would imagine.
It'll be out in fall of 2023. Probably about 30% of the bar stuff will be zero proof. There's going to be a big focus on zero proof stuff in it.
I want to segue away from coffee and just talk about your journalism, because while running Sprudge, you have a really active and robust journalism career. And I've been able to work with you and had the pleasure of working with you on many stories at Taste. I actually want to ask you about your Punch story, which won a James Beard Award about water.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was such an amazing expression of you as a journalist. I think that you bring a lot of passion. You're a connoisseur, you're a collector, and you bring a lot of passion to the page. It wasn't just writing. It felt like it was part of you in that piece. So
thanks. I appreciate that.
Sure.
It's a little surreal being here in New York. One of the things I've had a chance to think about it a little bit more is when all that stuff happened, it was the worst of the pandemic, like that digital James Beard thing in 2020 and whenever it was April. So there was no party. There was no thing. And for somebody like me who doesn't live here and is kind of coming at this stuff as a little bit of an outsider, I wish that there had been, because I would have got to go and meet all these people and go and be part of this thing or whatever. And I sort of, it's bittersweet because I mourn that a little bit, but obviously also like having that happen, I mean, it could have happened on the moon and I still would have been happy about it. So, but it's been fun to be back here again since that happened, because it does sort of change what some of the opportunities that
Let's talk about the story itself too. Yeah. What were you doing there? What were you saying about bottled water and mineral water and kind of our maybe misperception or misread of mineral water?
I think that when I came to the people at Punch, I was unknowingly solving a problem for them, which is a lot of times the best thing you can hope for as a freelancer. So you come in with an outside perspective and you solve a problem or you answer a conversation that editorial team had been happening.
So true.
Unbeknownst to you.
Which I was part of at the time.
Yeah. And I think that you all had a lot of conversations about does anybody have anything more to say about the LaCroix thing? Does anybody have anything more to say about what the sparkling water, what this kind of is? And I was able to come in and say, well, yeah, there's this sort of whole culinary world that's presented by mineral water that is kind of weirdly uninterrogated. And so let's talk about what that means. And there's some parts of the world where it's synonymous as like a health beverage. And then here in America, mineral water and bottled water has a sort of different narrative track of being wrapped up in wealth and privilege and sort of high society or whatever. You know, the fridge of Evian, or I talk about like the Fraser Crane drinking the mineral water on Frasier in the 90s and that kind of stuff. And anyways, the truth of it is sort of in between all those different kinds of things. And in researching the story, I got a chance to meet people who make their whole careers doing nothing but consulting on mineral water, educating on mineral water. There's mineral water sommelier courses you can go to. And I got to sort of link arms with the reader and go and investigate some of that kind of stuff a little bit, which was really fun. I learned a lot about it along the way too. And I just also really love mineral. I really love that stuff.
I'll link to that. Great story. Let's talk about some of your taste writing, because you've written about a range of topics that I feel only you could cover and give justice. One of them is vegan ice cream.
Yeah.
You came to us and said, I'm out in Portland. I'm seeing something, Matt and Anna. So what were you seeing and what did you write?
Well, there was kind of this moment, and I guess it would have been in the start of summer 2021, where all of a sudden I could go to like 8 dedicated vegan treat shops within 10 miles of my house.
Yeah.
And not only that, every other dessert shop, including some that have a national, footprint like Salt and Straw, were in sort of a ice cream Cold War arms race for who was going to do the most interesting vegan flavors. You couldn't just have one. You need to have like 5.
Exactly. There was such an abundance.
Yeah, it was this like thing, and it happened, and it felt like it kind of, obviously there's been non-dairy ice cream treats and things like that have been around for a long time. It's not new per se, but it catching the wind of the zeitgeist had this moment that felt kind of new and urgent. And sometimes some of that just comes from like, I don't know. I feel like I'm endlessly trying to think about this stuff, and every once in a while you'll be walking around somewhere or driving around in your car or something. You have this thing, and you're like, that is a story. The fact that there are 10 of these fucking things that I can go to is like interesting.
And it's just hiding there in plain sight. I felt like that piece was really nailed. That actually these flavors and the style of ice cream transcends any kind of restriction. It's actually a flavor profile and a style of ice cream that should be celebrated on its own.
Yeah. And I think also with the ice cream specifically, I am not a great fan of, personally from a culinary perspective, of some of the mock meats and substitute meats. I respect what it means, and I think the possibilities of it are interesting, but as a diner, as somebody who's eating the things, it's been a mixed bag for me personally. But the vegan ice creams are really good.
Yeah.
and when you're talking about ice cream, all you're really talking about is, the texture and the base. But using whipping up a non-dairy base and then adding the fruit flavors and the sugar and stuff, it's really kind of poised to be not just this replacement thing or this kind of vegan zeitgeisty thing, but also something that, like, if you like things that taste good, it very loudly argues for itself.
I agree.
That intersection, I think, is what's like actually interesting.
And it's just on the palate, the way that vegan ice cream hangs, and it doesn't cloy and cling the way that dairy does. And I feel you get that cleaner finish, to use a wine term. But I want to pivot to the story that we're working on. We don't have a run date yet, but it's about your experience with Eastern European grocery stores. In Portland. So what do these grocery stores tell us about ourselves?
Well, there are all over the country, and certainly a great many of them here in New York, and especially out in Brooklyn, at like Brighton Beach and Sheepshead Bay, and particularly in that part of Brooklyn, a interconnected network of Russo-Euro, Central Eastern European kind of pan-continental grocery stores that are very focused on imported products coming from Russia and Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary and all, Armenia and Georgia and all across that world. And then also selling products that cater to that market that happen to be made in the United States. Like I've learned like the sour cream, the smetana sour cream, which is something that I'm like obsessed with.
Oh my gosh, we've talked about it a lot. I love that smetana.
I really, really like it.
Oh my God,
all the great smetana in America actually gets made in the same production facility in Brooklyn. And they make it in these different styles. It's like a Lithuanian one, an Israeli one, a Russian one, an Amish one. And it's all made in the same facility to like slightly different recipes. I've spent a lot of time, and I think a lot of people have, trying to really sensitively and thoughtfully engage with, this is a bigger topic, and maybe we don't have all that much time to get to it, but this idea of like, America has a lot of problems, but there's a lot of great stuff about living in America. And one of the great things is that there's food from all over the world here. And you can go and have all this amazing food and like touch in on these cultural expressions of that food and like have your life bettered by them and like enjoy them and participate in them even, which is like a special thing. And it's not something that I take lightly. It's something that's like very much like improved my life and made my life like more interesting, and I appreciate it.
That's a nice tease to what we will be writing about on Taste. I feel we could go into a bigger conversation here.
But I haven't spent the same time at the grocery stores that express the culture that happened to be from my own family's diasporic like narrative, which comes from Russia. My grandfather emigrated from Russia before World War I in the early 20th century and settled in New York. And my family lived in New York until the 70s. They moved to the Pacific Northwest. And anyways, these kind of grocery stores, they offer a taste of home for people from those parts of the world to come and find the specific products they want, find the pantry items that they want to have cooked with. And where I really kind of got the major, I started going to these places looking for water. Like I started going for the mineral water because to go back to that story, most American grocery stores will have like a couple of bottled waters and most of it's just like filtered tap water or whatever. But if you go to the Russian grocery store, they'll have 20 import site-specific, spring-specific distinct mineral waters from all over Central and Eastern Europe. And that's really, really fun, but you have to kind of go to the specific place to get it. And eventually I started going and being like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to get the bread and I'm going to get the butter and I'm going to get the other stuff.
So you start picking up more items in the waters.
Yeah.
Love that. You wrote a piece for the San Francisco Chronicle. I wanted to close with your journalism with this one because it just came out. And I don't want to summarize it, but it was, in general, the natural wine movement has taken a leap in a cool direction. Explain the story. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I got a chance to work on a piece for the San Francisco Chronicle talking about a bar that had this sort of whole interesting pandemic narrative of being digital pop-up and then wine delivery and then has finally settled into a physical space that's in the Mission District, and it's called Bar Part-Time. And it's run by people who kind of are walking this twin path between Bay Area natural wine culture, working at natural wine establishments, and then nightlife, DJs, dance clubs. And they have fused those things together into a place that essentially functions like a discotheque, like a millennial discotheque or whatever, millennial and under. The average age when I was hanging out at this place was probably around 25.
And really? Wow. So it's different than Four Horsemen.
Different than Four Horsemen.
What James Murphy's doing
This is not sit down
Right.
Michelin. Very, very different. Yeah. And everything they sell is natural wine. It's a bottle shop. All they sell is natural wine. So it functions in this way that I think feels familiar with the nightclub, nightlife stuff. And there's some delicious tension to what it means for things like that to exist again after the pandemic, what it means to be in a room like that again after the pandemic or towards the end, wherever the fuck we are, mid-pandemic. I don't know what the right way to talk about it is.
We say post-pandemic here with a big knock on wood,
okay.
I feel.
That's good. I won't knock on the table.
Yeah.
But to have it have fused with the natural wine thing, which for a very long time has sort of just been, largely thought of as like an intellectual kind of pursuit or pretty esoteric and obscure, to have nightlife and youth culture fused with natural wine in this really explicit way at this one very specific place. I came in as an outsider and solved the problem because the editors there had been kicking around how to talk about this place and talk about what it means because they knew it was a hit. They knew it was really popular. And I was able to kind of come in and say, I think there's some stuff that's cool about this. I think there's some stuff that's weird about this. And will you let me go and write about it, but do it, experientially?
So how do you enjoy natural wine, if you're like listening to like a Milo track or Cut Copy or whatever, a jungle DJ, how do you express a wine, like the profile of a wine, if it's like in a club? Like, I feel like bottle service is there to serve a purpose. It's usually just to get drunk and then go dance or enjoy yourself at a club. So how do you merge? Because I feel like natural wine needs to be a little quieter than a club.
Yeah, well, I think what they would say, and what I've sort of seen them talk about on social media and stuff, is this idea that sometimes when you come to the bar, it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a little quieter. We've got tastings, or there's portfolio tastings, and there's a chance to engage with it a little bit more intellectually. But if you're here at 11 o'clock at night, it's, you know, your glass of chilled Mondews from the Minervois all the way up to the top of their like logoed glass, and you just sort of party and go, and it's like your dance juice, right? And I think that in practice, a lot more people come and are exposed to the second of those two things. It's kind of desultory, but in a way that mass access, mass adoption of any trend becomes like that. Like, there is this Sartrean path from cutting edge to avant-garde to, you know, mass acceptance to mundanity. And I think that the existence of like the Go-Go Natural Wine Club, and there will be more because this place is so popular and so kind of essential to that culture that more are coming, probably represents, it's a zenith of a moment, and that term implies gravity. And I think that we're sort of seeing that move towards from mass acceptance to something like.
It's cool that SF has something fresh on the nightlife scene, because it doesn't, at least from my outsider view, SF isn't a nightlife city the way that LA and New York are.
One of the most interesting things about it is that it's actually in the city. It's not in Oakland. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it for sure would have been.
Yeah, it's in the Mission, you said, right?
Yeah, but the commercial real estate, resident, you know, the real estate has really gotten hit. That city's really had a lot of upheaval with that stuff because it was such a people from out of town city. It really had reached this moment in 2018 or 2019 where like people came there for work from all over these different kinds of places. And I think over the last couple of years, a lot of those people got called home or went back, or they moved to Florida for the crypto, or LA for a consulting gig,
Austin,
or whatever.
baby.
You know, Austin for the taxes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So San Francisco is still there, though. It still has this thing. It's just like the culture of the city feels a little. The access has changed a little bit, and I think that Bar Part-Time is sort of a roundabout way of getting to talk about that a little bit too.
We ask all guests on the Taste Podcast if there was a dream cookbook project that you could work on without a budget, meaning you don't have to worry about money, without a deadline, which means you don't have to worry about time.
Yeah.
What would that book project be?
I thought about this today, walking through Central Park, walking around the city, trying to figure out how to answer this question. And I think there's sort of a couple of different roundabout ways of doing it. You know, I would love to someday get to read a really great cookbook that was about Amsterdam, Indonesian, and Surinamese cuisine. I don't think I'm the right person to write it, but I would love to buy that cookbook and cook through it and like get to experience it.
Dutch colonialism?
Yeah, that whole story, but what that's like with the food now in Amsterdam, because it's such an incredible food city and place to go and eat and go and experience it. And it's perhaps undertold, at least like globally undertold. I also think that people have done versions of this before, but being able to do like a really interesting thing about aquaculture and who the farmers are that actually do oysters and seafood out in the Pacific Northwest where I'm from would be really fun to get to work on. But the truth of the matter is, for me, you know, the stuff that I am hoping you're going to get to see more from me, and it's really the answer to like what would you dream to get to do, is to do reported fiction.
Yeah.
And reported fiction that takes place in part within the food world and within the journalism world. Because this is stuff that I have, you know, been working in and being around and thinking through and taking notes on, but also kind of filing away moments from it for how to figure out how to communicate stuff from it in the lens of fiction. And so my real dream is that someday I'll get to do some stuff like that has some interest to people who are familiar with things like the Taste Podcast, but happen, you know, in a way that is through the lens of like fiction, reported fiction.
I hope to have you back to talk about your fiction, Jordan Michelman. Thank you for joining the Taste Podcast.
Thank you so much.
The Taste Podcast is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Anna Heasel. The show is produced by Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Our theme music is by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening.